respite from the stress and grind of modern life, or to enjoy the beauty of nature. Others might camp to connect with people, or to seek a thrilling encounter with the wild. Whatever the reason, the definition of camping doesn't seem tricky or controversial. Americans expect the government to provide basic campsite infrastructure, a picnic table, a parking spot for the car, and a place for the fire, for a modest fee in nearly every corner of the country. Why would the head of the National Park Service need to define camping? It seems obvious. Jarvis, however, did not have the luxury of relying upon this presumptive definition. He found himself on the hot seat in the early days of 2012, well into the nationwide campaign of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Protesters had been occupying McPherson Square for 3 months by that point. Its dozens of tents formed one of the movement's last and longest-standing sites of protest, and they were frustrating Trey Gowdy to no end. While Jarvis had repeatedly called it a demonstration, to several committee members it looked as if protesters were camping. Gowdy insisted on a definition that would explain this situation because, he said, "I need to go back to South Carolina and tell everyone who wants to spend the summer in one of our parks what camping is and what it is not. So define camping for me, juxtaposed with a 24-hour vigil, because you seem inclined to draw a distinction, and I can't draw a distinction." Occupy threw prevailing assumptions about camping into disarray. Jarvis tried to clarify. Occupy was engaged in a political action for which camping served as a means, as opposed to the recreational pursuit, which camping was the end in itself. Unsatisfied, some representatives pressed him to identify the most fundamental feature of camping, rather than the motivating factor. Jarvis boiled this down to sleeping or preparing to sleep outdoors. He might have quoted the National Park Service regulation for Capital Region parks that defined camping as the use of park land for living accommodation purposes such as sleeping activities or making preparations to sleep, including the laying down of bedding for the purpose of sleeping, or storing personal belongings, or making any fire, or using any tents or shelter or other structure or vehicle for sleeping or doing any digging or earth-breaking. This legalistic description reduces camping to something that seems purely functional, virtually devoid of any of its pleasing qualities. According to this definition, Occupy was, in fact, camping. Protesters were sleeping, preparing to sleep, and using tents for sleeping, actions that were expressly prohibited at McPherson Square. Jarvis insisted, however, that they were equally engaged in First Amendment expressions through a 24-hour vigil, actions that were explicitly permitted there. For him, protecting these rights superseded prosecuting scofflaw campers. Occupiers themselves argued vehemently that they were not camping at all, holding tightly to a definition of their action as peaceable assembly to petition the government for redress of grievances. While they framed their protest as the opposite of recreational camping, it was the camping that made Occupy stand out. The tents allowed protesters to take over urban spaces for weeks at a time, driving city, campus, and federal officials to utter distraction. As one reporter described it, what made Occupy Wall Street so memorable and challenging was this sense of permanence, a grip on space only made possible by the tents and sleeping bags. These were not drop-in protests, pop-up rallies. These people came, and they came with Coleman camp stoves. Since when did Coleman camp stoves